going for a different format, but it is important in this context to go through a very quick history of this document. So the Economic Survey as a document has its origins in the early 1950s when it started out as part of the budget papers. So it is not published separately, but as a part of the budget papers. And the earliest one that I could find is from 1957. It was a very short document, only 38 pages long. And it was basically a descriptive document. It had some trends of recent trends, but not much by way of analysis, and almost nothing by way of recommendations and so on. So it was a very simple document, but nevertheless, that's where it started out. You can see on the left image, one of the earliest ones that we have images for. This is the one from 5960. Now, through the course of the 60s, the document became a lot more substantial. A lot more data, charts, tables, etc. began to be added to it. You also began to have a Hindi translation at that stage in the 60s. And by about the early 70s, this became a more substantial document, about 150 odd pages. So you have on the right an image from 1973. Now, through the 70s and 80s, this document took a life of its own. It was by this time being presented as a separate document a day before the budget. So by now, it has a character of its own. A lot more tables and charts are added. A statistical appendix is added in the end. And it begins to take on the form that is now much more familiar to what you would think of as an economic survey. I've got the one from 85, 86. Many people in this room will perhaps be familiar with that cover and may have studied it when in university. Now, the economic survey of 91, 92, as you can imagine, was particularly awaited because that was during the crisis of 91, and you had the reforms and so on. And this is the first time that it appeared in 2 volumes. The first volume was a very thin volume, only about, if I remember, some 30-odd pages. But it was the first time that 2 volumes were published. The second volume was much more traditional sectoral analysis. But in the following years, it reverted to being back a single volume. But the document kept growing. And of course, with the advent of computers, the graphics and so on improved very dramatically. So by, as you can see, 2001, 2002, the covers become much more colorful and so on. Then, during the global economic crisis, the document, a few extra thematic chapters were added to it by the then chief economic advisor, Dr. Arvind Vimani, perhaps to explain the predicament of that time. So you began to see a shift, somewhat of a shift from the purely sectoral approach to adding more themes. And it became a longer document, certainly by 2011-12, that you have on the screen. It was by this point almost 500 pages long. Now, it then became split into 2 volumes in 2014, but that was a split in 2014 into a text volume, which was mostly done in a sectoral format, and a statistical appendix volume. So there was 2 volumes, but in this format. But in the subsequent years, it ended up with a volume 1 and a volume 2. The first volume tended to have thematic chapters, and the second had the more traditional chapters from the sectoral type chapters. That has now been changed in this economic survey, and this is what it looks like. There is a volume 1, or you can call it the text volume, the economic survey itself. That is the main volume, which we just released. But there is a second volume, which is the statistical appendix. And it's been given a character of its own. It's been refreshed. Many old tables have been removed. New tables have been added. For example, new kinds of data like GST, IGST, and so on have been added. There's a whole new section on high-frequency indicators as well, in line with some of the thinking that I will now talk about. Now to the content of the economic survey of this year. Now, one of the clear points we make right up front in the